Hi, everyone. Welcome to our special conversation tonight. I'm Pastor Rachel McDonald from South Haven United Church of Christ, and I'm so glad that many of you are joining me tonight. And also a special guest I have here with me, the Reverend Kim Cran. So welcome once again. We're going to have just, I think, a fabulous conversation tonight about weaving and what that's like. And that is Kim's specialty, not mine. Do many crafty things, but weaving is not one of them. But here with South Haven during our Lenten season, the time leading up to Easter, we've been talking about unraveling. That's been our theme for the season, which is only too relevant of a theme, I think, for our lives, that things often do not quite go the way that we plan them to. But we're actually kind of hitting the point in the season where we're going to start to turn back to what happens when we actually weave things back together again. So Kim's going to help actually talk us through some really practical things and share with us some of, what weaving is like. But I think it's really more than just the nuts and bolts, although I'm very interested in those too, but also the spirituality of it. What does it mean to be a weaver, which is not a question I can answer. So welcome to everyone joining us, and also, of course, to you, Kim. I'm so glad that you agreed to join in conversation with me tonight. So I guess first off, would you mind introducing yourself to everyone who might not know you?
Sure. I'm the Reverend Kim Cran, and I'm pastor at Bethany United Church of Christ in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio.
Wonderful. And for those of you who might not be in the Ohio area, that means we are very nearby. Our churches are really neighbor churches. And Kim and I met in our regional sort of church body gatherings, and in particular, a special clergy group where we got to know one another. So we are part of sister congregations, which is wonderful, especially if you don't know about these other churches. I think it's great to know about those connections and that we are not alone. And Kim, how long have you been at Bethany? Not terribly long.
No, I'm starting my third year, so I had one normal year and then 1 year of lockdown, and now going into my third year, so not long at all.
No, quite the time to start at a church. I've only been at South Haven a little bit longer than that. But I definitely invited you here to talk with the folks at South Haven and anyone else who might be joining us, because in our meetings, every time it feels like I've talked to you, I've learned some really new and exciting piece of information about you in your life that just like thrills me. And finding out your relationship with weaving and how you are a weaver is one of those things that just delighted me, because I'm someone also who has, again, like kind of a lot of hobbies or sort of craft things that I do. And so when you sort of started talking about it, I was like, oh, cool, like a casual little hobby. And then you kept talking and I was like, oh my goodness, no, this is serious. This is significant. Weaving is a huge part of who you are. So I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit. But since you are the expert on this, I thought we could start really just by having you describe some basics of weaving to us, because even as I'm saying this, I don't know that everyone really knows what it means when you say weaving, because it is, kind of significant and different. So how would you describe the weaving that you do to others?
Well, weaving in its simplest form is just the interlacement of threads of any kind of, actually the interlacement of anything. It doesn't need to be threads. But when we think of weaving in its most traditional form, you have something. It can be as simple as this, or as small as one of those pot holder things that we all did as children, where you put the loops on and then
I made those.
over, under, and then under, over on the way back. But you begin with having threads that are attached to something, and this is called the warp. And then you go through a process where you take something else and put it into the threads, And like you did with the pot holders, over, under, or under, over, and you interlace the threads. And this is called the weft. And by bringing warp and weft together, you create a fabric, you create something whole. And depending on all the different variables, how close the threads are together, how far you space them apart, what material they're made out of, whether you go over, under, or over, under, and whatever, however you do that, that creates your design. That plus the colors that you use, etc. So it's an incredible thing. You get to create something whole out of all of these different threads, and you get to be part of this creative process. And it can vary a zillion different ways. And I get very excited about that. Can you tell?
Yeah, I mean, you really hide how you feel about this, Kim.
All right. Well, I'll try to do a little more poker face for you as we talk about the elements of weaving. No, I can't do that because it's too exciting. So I'm not even going to try. And looms can be very simple. They can be a couple of dowels and some rope hooked together to form a backstrap loom, like they use in Central America, South America, and in some parts of Mexico. They can be incredibly elaborate, like you see in large floor looms, and all kinds of little things in between. They can be, I understand, a CD that has some yarn wrapped around it so that people can do some weaving on their own at home. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about your church's project later on. So it's just a matter of finding a way to bring these different threads together to create a whole. And people in different cultures around the world have found different ways to do this. I have a number of floor looms in my home. It ceases being a hobby when you have to choose where you live based on having enough room to put the looms in the house.
I think that's a good line. That's the that's the difference.
So and and I had to downsize to come here. And in the little house I'm in right now, there's no loom in my bedroom. There's no loom here in the office. There's no loom in the bathroom. And there's no loom in the kitchen. So there are a few loom-free rooms. And I feel sad for them, but they're just not big enough to hold a loom. So the other rooms in the house make up for it for them.
You could probably fit a CD loom in those.
I could. As I was saying that, I was thinking, you could put a backstrap loom in the bathroom. There's room for a small table loom in the bedroom. And the kitchen's very small. That would have to be the CD loom.
That would be the small one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like things that you kind of know. That's how I feel about weaving. It's like information that it's not completely new, but it's like so many creative things, the variety and the difference and how much you can really invest and what you really can create out of it is just so wonderful, and almost how endless it is.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of what's so exciting about it, is that it's finding a moment of breaking free of those pot holders. We already had a comment. Colleen shared that she made a lot of those pot holders too. And I think, that's where most of us stop. And I'm excited how you really show a way of creativity that moves beyond that.
It took me a while to get beyond that. I made a lot of pot holders and was interested in doing more as a young child, but there was no one in my immediate surroundings who could empower that for me as a young child. My grandmother was the keeper of the crafts in our family, and she would knit and crochet and sew. So that was the repertoire. I could learn to knit, I could learn to crochet, I could learn to sew. And my grandmother taught me all of those things, and we would do them together. And I have wonderful memories of that. And my grandmother got me the little, I think it was metal, the little metal loom for the pot holders, and a bag of the loops. And I remember getting that as a child, and we did that together. But I wanted to learn more. But the more wasn't part of how my family worked. You could have more of what was familiar, but not more of what was new. So that stopped for me. And I expressed my creativity with sewing, and knitting was okay. Crocheting was okay. The best part was doing it with grandma.
Right. I mean, it is so true that we learn what we see. But again, what's offered to us. So of course, I mean, the question becomes, so if that's what was offered to you, how did you get from there to looms in almost every room of the house and where you are now? I know this is actually quite an interesting part of your story, so I'd love if you would share it with us.
Well, I'll share bits and pieces of it so that we're not here until midnight.
Great idea.
But I still maintained an interest in weaving, and in my immediate surroundings, there weren't opportunities to even see weavers or see people weaving. I grew up in Western New York, just outside of Buffalo, and it wasn't a craft mecca at that time. So it wasn't until, I would have been about 14. And I spent my summers at Chautauqua Institution, and taking a variety of courses. And I would stay in the summer school, which was a great experience for me. But there was a building that was full of looms in the art quadrangle. And I would walk past there on my way to the other things I had to do. And there was like a little sloped hill nearby, and I could sit on the sloped hill and watch through the windows and see people working on these looms. I was fascinated by it. And I thought, I would like to do that. That is something that I would like to learn. But those weren't the courses I was studying at Chautauqua. I was doing music classes, and I was doing pre-college classes you could take so that your freshman year you already had courses. And so those were the things that were the right things for me to be taking, not craft classes. You know, it was interesting at this time, early 70s, the kind of feminism that I was exposed to was one that was encouraging us to throw off the shackles of female stereotypes, do not go into any work that would reinforce old stereotypes of women. You need to get out there and do new things and blaze new trails, and don't let anybody pigeonhole you because of your gender. And so there wasn't a lot of support for looking at any kind of craft things and expressing yourself that way. Not a lot of support for that at all. So just let it go and maintained it as an interest. And then went and had I would say at that time it was a somewhat non-traditional career to end up going to seminary.
I'd say.
Yeah, and interestingly, I didn't pursue what I was most interested in seminary, because again, of what I had been exposed to in terms of, don't do what women traditionally do. So I am absolutely fascinated by spiritual development and faith formation, as we call it now, with children. Oh, absolutely not. You can't do that. Women have always been able to do that. You have to do something different. So after being in one incredibly squirrely church situation, I studied conflicted, crazy, squirrely churches. and went down that road instead. But one day when I was in one of those kind of 5-alarm churches, and it was right before a couple years before my 40th birthday, and my mom had just died very young, and my grandmother had died a year before her, and I had had a little health scare of my own. And I thought, well, what do I really want to do? I want to learn how to weave. So there was a secondhand bookstore near where my son, then a teenager, was taking organ lessons. So I picked up The Key to Weaving, which was a book by Mary Black. And I just started reading.
That is a significant book. That's like not like a little primer. I love that.
It was the only book in the secondhand bookstore on weaving. And it's also a classic, I came to find out. And it became my weaving Bible for years and years. And then I thought, well, reading about weaving is like reading about riding a bike without a bike. You're missing part of the experience unless you're doing it. So I looked and I found a community college that in the area that had an introduction to weaving class. And I signed up for it. And I told my church, we are not having meetings on Mondays and Wednesdays because I'm going to weaving class.
That's right. Keep those church meetings where they belong.
Which ended up being Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So I don't know that but I claimed that time, which for me was a huge thing. I had never done that before. Whatever night they wanted meetings, we had meetings. And as pastor, you serve. It didn't occur to me that I could say, wait a minute, I need this time for myself. And I went to that class and I fell in love. It was like I was doing something that I had been doing all of my life. I can't even put words around it. Maybe it's because I had almost memorized the book that on some level it made sense to my brain. I have a dear Buddhist friend who told me I've been a weaver through all of my past lives, and it just took me a while to find it now. I'll let God sort all of that out. But she would explain things in class and it was like, of course, yeah. And she had little table looms we could bring home. And I brought my little table loom home and I didn't sleep that night. I put the warp on it and I wove the project that we were supposed to be weaving all that week to take in next week. And I didn't sleep. I just wanted to weave. And it felt so natural. Myra, the teacher, agreed to take me on as an apprentice. And I was able to apprentice with her and just learn all the amazing things she had to teach me. And it was the beginning of me and weaving.
I just love that. I mean, there's just so much that makes my heart feel so good about that story. And also like some things that I'm like, oh, that went sideways. I mean, I think in particular, that journey of finding the things that like call to us or who we are and how we can find full expression of that, and how complicated that journey is for many people, even now. I just think that's a story that so many of us, even if people are like, I have no idea about weaving, right? Like that's the universal part of the story of like, what kept me from really being who I am, and how that's a story of how people have been pigeonholed by gender, by race, by economic background, by so many things, and how all of the things that we actually fight for is for people to have full expression of who they are and not limitation. So it's like when you reach that point where you're like, I found this thing and that's just who I was. I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's a better moment of how we like find God at work in the world than those moments when we're like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, again, I don't weave, but I play piano. And I know there's something about my story where I was very hesitant to play piano in church for a while. because I wasn't going to be a church pianist, I was going to be a pastor.
Oh.
And for those people now at South Haven who have seen me play piano now all these weeks for church, has actually been this wonderful moment of being like, oh, I can do it. Thank goodness, because I actually really do want to preach and play piano sometimes, because I come alive when I do that. So yeah, I mean, just to share in that joy of that moment, I think I just want to linger there for a moment, because that's so powerful. I know, I'm sure you can remember those moments like vividly. I can hear it when you talk about it.
And I just resonated as you shared the discovering that, you know, pastors are not supposed to also be the musicians. We're supposed to preach. We're in this role. Here is the box that we live in. And yet this is part of what makes you come alive. And when you can interlace the threads together, you're whole. And that means your ministry and your presence has a greater depth to it. I mean, that's wonderful. And you know, we need to take all of these people who had all these expectations and all of these shoulds and just sit them down and give them an opportunity to reflect on how unhelpful that is.
Yeah, almost always. Josh, his boss often tells him this phrase that now we've picked up to share with one another, which is "don't should all over yourself," which I know is not a new phrase, but was new to me. And I think there's just something to that. And again, to me, that's like a deeply spiritual thing of God seeming to me interacting in the world, offering freedom and liberation, and not a sense of that kind of constraint that doesn't allow you to be who you are, find those ways of being creative. Yeah, and again, how lovely that this thing that you found is also just this wonderful metaphor for the whole experience. I mean, how nice that that's just sort of handed to us.
And you know, I discovered that it was how I approached ministry. It was, you know, what I bring to ministry in working with conflicted and traumatized churches is, you know, we reweave the threads. We bring together with the Holy Spirit the wholeness, the healing. We reunite in a healthier, strong way. And sometimes that means cutting some of the bits out that aren't usable anymore, and bringing in new threads to strengthen the places that have been damaged beyond repair. But it was the ministry I was doing. It was my approach to my vocation. I was a weaver. And it was like, wow, this archetype, if we're going to be Jungian, you know, this framework is right deep down in my soul. And instead of fighting it, just embracing it and letting me be. Just
so powerful, so important. And I know we are talking sort of about this already, but I think it is interesting how gender plays into this. Again, just that sense of you had to find your way almost through being able to describe what it meant for you to be who you are, but also how does that look like? I mean, again, weaving almost wasn't available to you in a strange way because it was viewed in a certain category or only for certain people. But what more on that? How is that now? Or what have you brought to that? I mean, there's just so much that changes how you engage with it. I'm sure that it's not as some disconnected, not embodied person, but as a woman.
Well, I think today, weaving has much less gender restriction to it. And the restriction that I experienced was you need to be a professional woman, and a professional woman doesn't engage in crafts. You could be an artist, but you're not going to be an artist as a weaver, which, oh my goodness, there are such incredible artists.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, you're not going to do that. You need a profession. You need to be a professional. And if you can be in a profession that was previously dominated by men, all the better. Early 70s, not where we are now. I would say the majority of, and I don't know this to be true, but I think this is the case. In America, the majority of weavers are predominantly women. That was not the case when America was founded. The weaver back in colonial times was a man. And if you were landed and had land and had a barn, in your barn, you had the frame of a loom built into your barn, and the weaver would come and the weaver would weave cloth for you, and you would get your cloth. That was one of the ways you got your cloth. But it was predominantly male work originally in the colonies. Out west, a lot of the weavers in the Southwest in the 1800s were men. Their looms are so cool. Their looms, you stand to weave and you walk on the treadles. And they're these big, huge, marvelous looms that you see in the Rio Grande Valley, and you walk on them. And so you can get a rhythm going where you're almost dancing. It's so much fun.
I love that. Well, isn't it? I mean, it's all weaving is in some way a very tactile, embodied experience, but just to take that to like the extreme. And I think that's why like questions about gender and things are so relevant, because it is something about, and we actually just talked about this in our worship service this past week, and I've been really thinking about it, that like when we think of spirituality as something that's disconnected from our bodies or just about our head knowledge or some sort of abstract thing, we do a real disservice to saying that like our spirituality, our faith is always also about like what we're doing, how we're feeling, what are our bodies doing. So yeah, it's something about that image of weaving isn't just sort of like a gentle quiet in the corner doing a small sort of thing that you don't think about, but it's actually using your whole self.
Oh, it really is. And for me, it's been a wonderful vehicle for prayer. I guess I don't like labels, but if I were going to stick some labels on my forehead, I would probably grab a contemplative label and I'd put that on. My prayer life is very, very precious to me, and I've spent a lot of time in monasteries. So the prayer of the hours and the praying at 7 or 8 times a day, to me, that's a good time for a day off. You know, if I have a day off,
Yeah.
I pray the hours, and I love that. And I was always puzzled by the Apostle Paul's instructions to pray without ceasing, because I thought, you know, yeah, who can do that? I mean, really, you know, I guess that's all right if you don't have a life, but
Right, yeah.
How do you put those two together? But as I, over the years, encountered the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy. And as I got into the rhythm of weaving, I could pray for hours at my loom, on a floor loom. We'll come back to this for a second. With your threads, you've got to figure out how to lift them up so you can put your yarn through. That's called the weft. So the warp has to lift, and there are lots of different ways to do that. Some looms lift certain threads up and leave the other ones just flat. Other looms, when they lift some threads up, there are pulleys that pull the other ones down. And other looms, called countermarch, are structured so that threads are both pulled up and pulled down. That's really hard to visualize by my using words, but you got to create that space.
Right, or else how do you know where to But I get it. It's hard to describe, but I think I'm following.
And on most floor looms, it's all tied up with pedals that are down at your feet called treadles. So the pedals are treadles, and you step on them, and they're tied to different things called shafts. And the shafts have little things in them called heddles, treadles,
Oh
pedals.
dear.
What were they thinking when they came up with these words? But all of that works together to move the threads apart and create something called a shed. So you can throw your shuttle with your weft thread through. And that's how you make your design. So you throw with one hand, catch with the other, beat, throw, catch, beat. So you get this rhythm going, and you can fit the Jesus prayer to that very easily. And if you're musical, you can sing it, and you just keep singing and weaving, and your body's moving, and you're stepping on treadles, and you're leaning, and you're throwing and catching and beating, and you get into this wonderful dance that is you're fully present, but you are connected to things in a way that defies words. And what a great way to pray. Oh,
Kim, you've sold me. I don't know, like, I don't think that was the purpose of this evening, but I'm like, oh, I need like a loom yesterday. So that just sounds, yes. I mean, yes. How can we not? I mean, how much have we ruined? Well, I shouldn't say ruined. Some people take great love out of it, but the way we've taught prayer and connecting with God is a very static, head down, quiet, patient thing. And especially that's how we teach children to start. Oh dear, what
what have
a
we done?
because so many of us don't engage with the world in that way, and some of us do. And again, so I need to be careful to not totally throw that out. I think many people find a lot of calm from the stillness like that, but also many of us need to move,
Mhm.
and the prayer that comes from that. Oh, I just love that. Well,
There's a children's book, The Monk Who Grew Prayer. And it talks about this monk who would work in his garden growing prayer. And when he was working in the garden, hoeing and harvesting, he was growing prayer. And when he was all of the different chores he was doing all day long, he was growing this rich harvest of prayer because it was part of the movement and everything he did. And I love that book. It's one of my favorite children's stories.
well, I'll have to get that too. This will be quite the shopping day for me tomorrow. I think again, because we're really talking all about this already, but how does, what is this relationship like with your spirituality and the weaving, and how does that sort of like cycle? Because I think there's like a way of articulating, or some of what you're already naming, that like they're not distinct things. I think, and this is what I'm trying to, I guess, get at is so often we've been able to separate church and our spirituality into boxes that sort of exist in other places. And I especially have felt this in this year in which we have primarily been in our homes, many of us, and haven't had another sort of spiritual place to go to. And I think it really forces us to think about how the creative acts we do, or how our normal everyday acts, or all these things actually are tied up in our spirituality and not just these separate islands. So you've already named some of that, but is there anything else we're missing with that? Or how do you see that kind of circular relationship?
Can you say a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so I think it would be very easy to say, I'm a pastor in this box, and that's where God is. And then I come home and I weave, and that's different. This is just a hobby. This is just where I unwind. This is not the same. How is it? It's almost like finding that spiritual through line, a life that's not just, again, sort of partitioned things. And so I'm wondering if you have ways of articulating that in your own life, or in maybe even how you would share it with others, because sometimes, and I think maybe especially as pastors, it's kind of like the thing that teachers get where it's like, well, you only teach and then you're at school and then that must be it. Like how little kids especially think about teachers, and like there must be nothing else. So like we must just sort of exist on Sundays and have that thing, and that's where all the spirituality and God talk goes. And then it evaporates. But instead, again, what I hear you saying is actually quite the opposite.
Yes. Well, let me talk a little bit, and I will watch your face to see if I'm heading down a road that makes any sense, or if I've just gone off on a detour somewhere. And it's okay to pull me back if I go
I
off
can do that.
on a quick tangent. I no longer separate my experience of weaving and my experience of ministry and my experience of being me. It's all one thing, and they inform each other. For example, when I start a project, I'm going to weave a scarf. I plan that, I envision it, I think about the materials I'm going to use, because all of the materials are unique. Every yarn is different and needs different and is good for different things. What you wouldn't use a really, really fine silk for a rug unless you were knotting Persian carpet. And then you'd use a lot of it for years and years to get those knots. You need to know, you need to respect the diversity and the uniqueness of the threads. In ministry, you have to respect the diversity and uniqueness of the people, because they're all different with different stories and different needs and different gifts. And so being able to celebrate the diversity and the uniqueness allows one to engage in ministry in a healthy way as a leader, allows one to plan as a weaver. And you have to plan, because if you have 2 ounces of a beautiful silk that you want to use for a project, you've got to figure out how much silk that project's going to need. Because if you don't have enough and you start it, you are just reinterpreting that parable Jesus told in Luke about before you build the tower, better plan and count the cost.
Yep.
Because you don't want to start it and can't finish. And having had the experience, more than once, of being really excited, eyeballing a skein of yarn and going, oh, that's more than enough. And getting 3/4 of the way through and going, yeah, no. You plan. And we do that in ministry as well. We need to, and some of us plan more obsessively than others. I fall into that camp. But you need some structure, and you need some planning so that you can get to where you want to go. When I started weaving, Myra was a master weaver. I apprenticed with her, and I used to rush the planning process and the warping the loom and getting it ready because I wanted to weave. So I would race, cut corners of everything you do when you want to get to your goal. And Myra would say to me, no, you have to love every part of this process. You have to be present in every part of the process, or your end result is going to be poor. Learn to love all the steps. And I would, smile, and my eyes would roll up in the back of my head. And I think, yeah, love this.
Right.
Who loves winding a warp? Well, I'll tell you who does now. I do. Because at some point along the way, I slowed down and I learned to really appreciate and savor all the different pieces that go into the journey. And in ministry, if you can't savor all the pieces that go into the journey of a congregation, you are going to burn out, and you are going to really, really get discouraged, because 99% of it's journey, maybe 100%. I'm not entirely sure, but 99% of it is journey, and helping people to gain that comfort with the journey and to be with them in the journey, both with individuals and the community as it journeys. You got to love all the bits. And weaving taught me how to do that. I don't know. Am I making sense?
No, that's great. I mean, I think these are always tough things to talk about when we're using metaphors or trying to connect things, but it's almost this is part of the spiritual practice of connecting these things in our lives, and hearing you talk about how you, I don't know, understand these parts of your life together, I think is the thing that helps, hopefully, anyone who's hearing, and definitely me, to think the same thing back into my own life. I mean, and again, perhaps especially in this time, and as we've been, I mean, in our congregation, as we've been going through this Unraveled series, but also again, just this whole year of it's such a time of things really falling apart, but also needing to be put back together again. So this practice of actually thinking through, where am I drawing strength from? What language do I use? How does my life fit together? What brings me hope? I don't know, all those things like are just actually vitally important. So to just hear you reflect on how these things line up in your life, and how, again, it's not disconnected parts that just sort of hang out, how this actually makes up your life and how you exist in the world. I mean, that might sound a little bit like lofty, but I think it's very important, because I think so many of us are actually trying to synthesize and, again, weave, perhaps, if we would like to use that metaphor, like our lives back together in a way that actually makes sense and feels okay, and we can describe to others. So again, that's pretty big picture. So maybe we'll just let that one kind of sit for a moment and let people think about it. But I really, for myself, I've been challenged lately in this season that we're starting to peer out of the pandemic, of recognizing that if it is this season of having been unraveled, now I actually get this chance to put some things back together. So listening to people whose lives I admire and hearing how they put their lives together is actually very important. So thank you for sharing some of that. I actually think it's very meaningful and important for many of us.
Well, I think there's a piece I want to add to this, and I brought some props tonight.
Hooray, props!
There was reason to use them, but I didn't bring a prop for this, which is a shame, because I have a whole box full of these in the living room right now, which is where the loom that I'm currently using is situated. But it's like, so, and nothing is perfect. In our weaving, in how we pull things together, we have to hold space for imperfection. And for example, I've put a lot of warps on looms now. I am very skilled at it. And when I can get a warp on a loom, if you look at it, those individual threads that haven't been woven yet, but are on that back beam and coming up and ready to be woven, they can look as even as if they are cloth already. And that's just sheer repetition has gotten me to that point. And I remember one time when a student came over for a lesson, and I had just put a warp on, and she said, "Oh, that's perfect." And I said, no, it's not. And let me show you why it's not. And I said, you see this? I said, that's because this is holding two broken threads together. Do you see this? You know, part of weaving is knowing how to deal with the broken threads and the things that aren't working and the things that aren't fixable and the things that are fixable, and knowing what the fixes are, because it's not perfect. And I could have 15 or 20 of the old Kodak black film canister, things that
Mhm.
have been used for a variety of things throughout human history, but they're also used to help repair broken threads on looms. And so I have a whole drawer full of them because there are always broken threads. And I have T-pins because the T-pins fasten the broken threads on the front end of the loom. And I have a variety of weights for when the tension on the loom goes wonky, even though I've been very careful and I need to compensate and I need to improvise. And weaving's a lot like jazz in that way, because there's a whole, yes, there's a process and you can learn the process. And then there's a whole lot of improvising to get it to turn out, because threads break, things fray, stuff happens. And yet, in the end, we can still end up with a whole cloth. And learning how, I was so arrogant when I started with Myra. Myra said, you've got to learn how to learn how to handle broken threads. I'm not going to break any thread. I'm not going to break any threads. She said, you're going to have to learn how to improvise for when you have threaded the heddles incorrectly. And in the middle of the loom, there's one mistake and it's going to throw off your whole pattern. I'll double check myself. This isn't going to happen. Over the years, I've gotten very skilled at improvising and fixing mistakes and dealing with all of the things that break that you don't expect will break, and still coming out with whole cloth. And I think we all are doing that, especially right now, because so many things broke that we didn't expect would break. And so many edges are frayed and so many threads don't look like they're even usable. And how do we end up whole again? We're all
Yeah,
living
I
with
mean,
that.
if only we could answer that. But I do think there's something so important about exactly what you just shared, which is almost the mark of this, of skill, of experience, of teaching, of sharing, is actually not the perfection.
That's right.
But actually the opposite, the ability to continue on even in the midst of imperfection.
Mhm.
That sounds like truth to me, and what I've seen in the world, and especially now. And it kind of, I think, is actually turning us toward kind of our last little bit of the conversation, which is sort of, we started with how you were learning to weave, but then actually, and you've already sort of dropped it in there, then you went from learning to teaching, which is like the full circle. And I think that's a very teacher thing for you already to tell us all, and makes a lot of sense to things. I try to teach when I teach piano, and how often I'm trying to tell students, okay, for recital, it's really not about you being perfect, it's about you not like hyperventilating if you forget. And honestly, that's like the only thing. And we do that so much in church. Talk to any church musician. We never know anything about what we're doing, but you get really good at just sort of knowing, like, I'm just going to keep playing, or sort of hoping it comes back in, or I'm going to, keep moving past all those wrong notes I hit. So I think that's you're showing your teacher self, I think, by presenting this. But do you have any other sort of wisdom or things that have changed now as you've moved from student to teacher? And I know those roles are often still very tightly interwoven, but
I love teaching. I just love teaching. I haven't done any teaching since I got to Ohio. It was sufficient to get to know a new congregation the first year, and then lockdown, and weaving is a hard thing to teach on Zoom. So
sure.
it's
Yeah.
doesn't lend itself well to remote learning. So, and I don't know when I will be teaching again, but I've thought a lot about the different weaving teachers that I've had. And I had some really good technicians who taught me, but in
Yeah.
particular who taught me lace weaving and drummed some technical weaving into my brain. It's amazing that I still loved lace weaving because she didn't seem to love it. although she was very skilled at it, but
Yeah.
no love came through. Whereas some of the teachers I've studied with, their love, I mean, their love of what they were doing and what they were bringing was infectious. And they wanted to share that love and wanted me as a student to also have that respect for what they were teaching. And so um, I can teach a lot of technical things, but the students who tend to stay with me are the ones who are falling in love with weaving, and who want that environment kind of protected and cultivated, and want to hear weaving's wisdom. And all of the teachers who taught me, I hope the good lessons that they shared are stored in me. I hear Myra's voice regularly when I'm winding a warp, especially if I don't take the time to be mindful beforehand. Because if you're tense when you wind a warp, you put the tension and the stress into the way you wind the threads. And then when you go to put them on the loom, that tension continues, and things are wonky. It just doesn't turn out the way you want it to. So she would say to me, don't put your stress into your warp, pay attention. And so I'd have to pay attention before I do that. And I dare say there are a number of students who do that as well now, because they've heard me say that. And so to be able to share the wisdom as well as the technique and the love, and to journey with someone and to watch them develop, it's a wonderful thing. And I feel when I'm teaching that this sounds mystical, but I think you have room in your head for this idea. I'm standing with the ancestors, going back and forward or around, however time works. I don't know how time works, but there's this continuity, and I'm part of this incredible, what we in Christianity might call the crowd of witnesses, or the communion of saints. And I feel that powerfully, kind of a suspension of time and a with something that's bigger than myself. And I love that. I love that. I love it when I see a student make the connection and go, and something, and it might be something really small, but a connection happens, and then more things open. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
It's a magical moment. I know we have some teachers joining us tonight, so I suspect they they empathize with that. I think that's a lovely almost invitation for many of our folks who are joining us, because we're almost kind of giving both, saying if there's the thing that you know and you love and you can share, wonderful. And also if you need to go back and be a student, engage in that way, wonderful. We like all of this. And in all of that, I think there's a deep spirituality and sense of where God meets us, either in the giving or the receiving, which is, again, so full circle. I think it's just so beautiful. And I will show here before we completely wrap up now what is a different type of weaving than what you would do, because the South Haven folks, you may have this at home already. And I showed you earlier, this is my little CD weaving, and many of you at South Haven have this. So if you have not already woven your little kit, this is a great time. And actually, I'm going to invite you to come bring it and maybe share it with one another, and we'll collect these all together. But it's so funny, it's just a CD that has a little loom built in the back and
Yep.
just random scraps. I mean,
Yep. So the CD is your loom frame,
okay.
and the yarn that you've wound around it is your warp, and
Okay.
the scraps of fabric and thing that people have wound through is the weft. It's weaving.
We've done it.
Yep.
You didn't even know
Totally.
what we were doing. And I think Doris had even asked if there was any technique, and the answer is kind of just do your best, and also make your little these threads on the back tight enough that you can at least just shove fabric in here if it starts to look bad, and just cover it up and just put more in it and hope for the best. But
Sounds like, it sounds like weaving jazz. Yes.
sounds like it. But if you have not yet done this, or if you actually want access to the little tutorial for this, let me know, and I'll get you some of these resources to maybe, if you were inspired. But I'm sure also Kim would have a lot more specific weaving sort of resources. If you have questions, reach out to me. I can get you in touch with Kim, or leave something in the comments. As you can tell, this is a wonderful place where Kim just knows an awful lot. And it's really great when you're connected with someone who has that type of knowledge. Before we go, though, first, again, thanks to everyone. I've been tracking some of our comments. We have people following along and listening and sharing, and I'm just so grateful for that. But Kim, to you, though, before we go, any final things that we've missed? I mean, you have so much to offer. I don't want to cut anything off.
Thank you for inviting me to share this important part of me tonight. I've loved talking with you about weaving, and I would just encourage anyone who has something that has been calling to them, kind of just pushing them a little bit inside, something that they feel opening up, something that they've been longing to do, maybe something that they didn't think was important or wasn't worth their time, but was something that was really calling from their heart, that follow your heart, see where it leads you, and see if it doesn't open up in a way that leaves you feeling that this is who you are all along, and pull all those threads together. I'm in no position to give you permission to do anything. But if you need someone with gray hair to tell you it's okay to do this, oh, please do.
Please do it. Oh, so true. What a wonderful invitation, Kim. And hopefully, yeah, everyone takes that with you. And hopefully this helped open everyone up a little bit too, just to this message that we've really been leaning into this season of, it's okay that things fall apart a little bit. We'll be there. And there's a process of putting it back together, of weaving something new again.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be doing it together one way or another. Kim, thank you so much for sharing. This is just delightful. And again, we could talk for a very long time, but we will let everyone carry on with their evening. But I'm so thankful that you said yes to when God called you to ministry, but when God called you to weaving, and when I said, would you please come talk with us? And I just think it again leaves a lot of invitations for all of us to just keep thinking about this. And again, if anyone has any other follow-up, just chat. Hopefully you know how to reach me and get in touch. We're here. But for now, I think we'll say good evening, and thanks to everyone for joining. And again, a special thanks to you, Kim. This was just fabulous.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. You take care. Good night, everyone.
Good night.